Testing. Okay. Wonderful. Well, first off, hello, everybody. Welcome to Louisiana's Old State Capitol. My name is Ashley Shoptaw, and I'm the Education Coordinator here. We're very, very excited to have y'all here tonight. Of course, we are a Secretary of State museum under Secretary Nancy Landry, and it is part of our mission to help educate the public on the rich history of Louisiana as well as the democratic process. Tonight, we have a special lecture to accompany our weekend-long pop-up exhibit, Hemp Impressions. This talk will explore the creative potential of hemp to create contemporary fiber art by demonstrating the use of hemp in various applications. Leading the talk is Dr. Casey Stannard, Associate Professor of Apparel Design at Louisiana State University. She and her graduate students have worked hard to create the fabulous array of garments that we have on display here tonight. She will dive into the history of the process and its relevance and importance today. And this exhibit project was grant supported by LSU AgCenter's Therapeutic Cannabis Research Committee. After the talk, I'll be passing around a microphone if anyone in the audience has any questions. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Casey.
All right. Is this good on sound? We're all right? Okay. Now we'll go with teacher voice. Okay, so thank you all so much for coming. I'm going to give you a little brief background on myself, and then we'll go into a little bit about hemp, and then we'll actually talk about the exhibit in the second part. So I am a professor of apparel design at the LSU College of Ag. Yes, we are in the College of Ag, so it comes out of the old home ec situation. That's where that comes from. As part of my work, I teach courses and I also conduct research, and then I do creative scholarship. Most of my creative work focuses on sustainable apparel design. So that's kind of where I got invited and really enticed into working with hemp, and we'll kind of dive into it from here. And if we can have a new slide. Perfect. Whoa, all the slides. There we go. Okay, so special thanks. I've got to give my special thanks out to the LSU AgCenter and the Therapeutic Cannabis Research Committee, which supported this grant, as well as to the LSU College of Ag and our Vice President and Dean, Matt Lee, to the Department of Textiles, Apparel Design, and Merchandising, as well as the Department of Agricultural Economics and Agribusiness. And my co-PIs, Dr. Matt Fannin and Dr. Jared Penn, who are actually also working on this project with me. So those are all of my thanks. Again, thanks to all of you for coming today. And a big thanks to my graduate students, Arena and MG, for helping me put this up because it was quite an undertaking for us. All right, so let's go ahead and define hemp because there's a lot of confusion about it. So hemp comes from the Cannabis sativa plant, and there are different biotypes of this plant. Those with the high tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, are intoxicants, and those with low THC are industrial hemp, or hemp from now on, because industrial hemp is a very long word. High THC is defined as more than 0.3% in most countries. However, in the EU, it's defined as 0.2%. So again, they have stricter standards than we tend to in the US. All right, so that's the definition. All right, so the actual hemp plant. Hemp is what's considered a bast fiber plant. It is very similar to linen and jute. This is a picture of it growing here, and the actual fibers are part of the stalk of the plant. And there are a number of different layers to this plant. So the very center is very woody, and we'll actually watch a video of that in a little bit. It's called the hurd. We then have some shorter fibers right around the hurd, and then we have the long, very strong fibers of hemp, which are further out and closer to the exterior of the plant stalk. So that's where everything is situated in the hemp plant. Again, very similar to linen. All right. So some of the uses of hemp. And frankly, my picture is way too small for me to read anymore. So I'll read them off here for you. There are a number of uses for it. We use the leaves and the stalks for things such as mulch and animal bedding, as well as medicine. The stalk itself we can use to create textiles, insulation, rope, molded plastics. There's a very interesting hemp-based plastics industry. So that's a very cool new emerging industry. They also do some fiber boards. So for construction materials, hemp paper is another big one. They can use the roots for organic compost and again for medicine. And then the seeds themselves are where you can get more of your food type products. So this is where you're going to get your flour, beer, animal feed, as well as your butter and your cooking oil. So a lot of different uses coming out of that plant. Okay. So I wanted to briefly touch on the history of hemp before we kind of dive into the actual uses of it for fashion. So hemp was actually the very first man-made or man-cultivated fiber. Elizabeth Barber, who is a very important textile historian, believes that hemp was sort of a camp follower. So like it would follow like very prehistoric camps and be available around those. We have evidence of it in ancient China. So there are impressions of hemp ropes and hemp textiles on pottery from ancient China. So very, very old. We have some estimates of between 10,000 BCE and 8,000 BCE. So extremely old. We also have a new-ish, new for history, but in the last 10-ish years, archaeologists have just found a bunch of hemp rope samples along the Dead Sea, and they dated those to the early Bronze Era. So they were about 3,000 BCE. So these are pictures of those early hemp ropes they just found. So they were actually able to go in here and analyze the little genetics of them to figure out what type of fiber it actually was. So very interesting work being done by the archaeologists on really what the history of hemp was. But yeah, it was our first fiber. So that's pretty cool. All right, I love this map. I think this is great. Again, I love archaeology, so was taking a look at some of the things that have been published about hemp. And what this map is showing us right here are as of, and I believe this article came out in 2017. So as of 2017, these are where all the major findings of hemp were and where they date to. So anywhere that you see a black box, it's older than 8,000 BCE. So we have some of those available over in the Eastern Asia. We also have a few sites that are over in Europe. So a number of really old samples have been found by archaeologists. And really they range throughout the Bronze Age that we are seeing a lot of hemp usage by early humans, which is pretty awesome. So hemp comes to North America. How did hemp get over here? That's always a great question. When hemp came to the North American continent, it actually was brought to Port Royal, Acadia in 1606. I have some documentation. This is actually a map of Acadia. That's the little fort where the boats would come and like bring everything back in the day. And for those of you who are like me and don't know exactly where Acadia is because you're not a Louisianan, that's where it is on the map. It's over in Canada. But we are very familiar with Acadia down here in Louisiana since they eventually came down to Louisiana. But that's where hemp first comes into the North American continent. So hemp in the United States. Hemp was again brought down from Acadia into the colonies. At this time, we were using hemp to make paper. I read some counts that said early drafts of the Declaration of Independence were written on hemp paper. So that was pretty interesting. They were using it a lot for rope, as well as some clothing, more like homespun type clothing, animal feed, and other usage. But really, those were kind of the main ones. George Washington was actually a very big advocate of hemp growing. He has some really great letters that are left down where he talked about his farming because he really was a farmer. And he was very interested in varieties of hemp. He actually imported Indian hemp from Asia, and he was using that for fiber. And he was pretty excited about it. In 1796, he wrote this letter to William Pierce, and he was his manager of the farm. And Washington says, "What was done with the Indian hemp plant from last summer? It ought, all of it, to be sown again, that not only a stock of seed sufficient for my own purposes might be raised, but to have disseminated seed to others, as it is more valuable than common hemp." So, founding fathers really big into hemp. Actually, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, Andrew Jackson, Zachary Taylor, and Franklin Pierce all had hemp growing. So it was a very prolific crop early on in the US history. Okay, so hemp continued. Hemp really reached its peak in the US right around 1840 to 1860. The industry was really taking off. It was particularly successful in Kentucky, Missouri, and Illinois, but Kentucky was definitely the winner. They were using hemp at this time. A lot of it was taken up by the Navy. So the US Navy had a lot of demand for rope and sailcloth. So that's where a lot of this hemp product was going. I love this picture here. It's really exciting. It's from 1898, the Popular Science Monthly magazine. And this is showing some farmers. They are taking the hemp plant and they're actually standing it up so they can start the next process of getting it ready for becoming fiber suitable for textiles. All right, so moving on in the history of hemp in the United States. In the 1930s, hemp really starts to slow in production. So the reason that hemp is slowing in production, we have competition for competing fibers. So we have cotton is really growing. It's becoming very important. We also have the introduction of synthetics. So we have like rayon starting to come in. And so hemp is starting to kind of like become less important. In 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act was passed and hemp production really declined from there. So there was that kind of like, oh, industrial hemp is also an intoxicant. We need to stop growing it. So that really put a damper on hemp production in general. There was a brief campaign during World War II to grow hemp again. So they put out a lot of propaganda. You can see an evidence right here in this lovely poster I found, trying to get people to get excited to grow hemp for the war effort. We were running out of fiber. Everything was going overseas. So they thought, okay, we used to be good at growing hemp. Let's try it again. So gave it a brief bit of life and it was starting to maybe pick up a little bit. And then 1970 came along with the Controlled Substances Act, and that did outlaw the production of hemp, including industrial hemp, which we're talking about today. So that was outlawed within the country during Nixon's era. So in the next, 50-ish years, there were a lot of efforts to try to get industrial hemp reclassified so we can start growing it again. There was a Farm Bill of 2014, which authorized some pilot programs in states like Colorado to start trying to grow industrial hemp again and, get that market maybe going and see what would happen. In 2018, we had the reintroduction of industrial hemp through the Farm Bill. And so that allowed for hemp to start being grown again. And really each state kind of got to plan its own pathway. So in Louisiana, we gave LSU and Southern had the ability to start growing it. So they sort of controlled what was going on for a while there. Okay. All right, this is a really great image in terms of just sort of informing you about the planting process of hemp. We're going to take a brief agricultural journey here. All right, so, oh, thanks. I want to stay on this one for just a second. We have our tractor here. We've got 5 different rows of planters. No, wait, 6. And each one has got a human sitting behind the little red chute, and they're putting they're helping to make sure those plants are going into the ground as they're planting it. So this is the baby hemp getting planted right here. All right. Thank you. Okay. So the numbers. What is the actual value of hemp today? In 2023, the value of hemp for the United States was $291 million. And the production of hemp grown for fiber was estimated at 49.1 million pounds. And we're seeing that the average yield in 2023 of hemp fiber was estimated at about 4,000 pounds per acre. So it was up 900 pounds per acre from the previous year. So they're getting better at growing it, is what this statistic is telling us. How the value of hemp was totaled at 11.6 million, which was down 59% from 2022. So why is the actual value going down? We think a lot of it has to do with production. So people got really excited, like, I can grow hemp now. I'm going to grow a whole bunch. And they had trouble growing it, or they couldn't figure out a way to process it. So it did still have some barriers that we need to still address as we move forward. Okay. All right, so processing hemp. How do we actually do it? What are we looking at? So this is a raw hemp fiber. And what you can see here is they've taken and they've kind of peeled back the actual plant stalk. So this is the stalk of the plant. The center is called the hurd. It's very woody. You can use it for a lot of different things like animal bedding, but it's not going to be textile friendly. Then you have the bast fibers, which are the long, skinny strings. And this is what we actually want to use for textiles. So there has to be a mechanization of how do you separate this. I watched some very entertaining videos on YouTube about people who were growing their own small crops of hemp and like doing this by hand. Extremely labor intensive. I would not want to process my own hemp. So how do we actually mechanize this? Good news. I'm going to lay out the steps for you, and then we're going to watch a couple videos. So first, this lovely pinkish purple down here on the bottom, this is going to tell you the actual steps in general. There are actually more steps than this to create hemp textiles. So textile processing is very labor intensive. Even with mechanization, there's a ton of steps. So first and foremost, you got to grow the hemp. Then you got to harvest it. The next step is retting the hemp. And this is where you actually let the plants lay in the field and get kind of moldy. So they've got to break down a certain amount out in the elements before you're ready to start processing them for fiber. Decorrugating, this is where you're going to kind of crunch up the fibers and start to separate the herb, which is that woody core, from the actual fiber itself. Degumming. So the hemp fiber has like gum. It's got like a sticky resin on it that needs to be removed. We actually have some fabulous research being done with our Dr. Wu in our building, who was actually looking at new ways to do degumming, and they've come up with a new chemical that works pretty darn well. So we're excited about that. But yes, you have to degum it if you want. You can leave it in a more natural state, which is appropriate for, say, like ropes. But if you want like a true nice textile, you're probably going to degum it. You then need to card it. So you need to get all those fibers laying in the same direction so that you can get it into usable threads. So after carding, then you can go into spinning and then either weaving or knitting in order to actually make textiles. So again, there are more steps in here. You might need to bleach it. You might need to dye it. And all of those are going to require their own specialized equipment. So I get a lot of questions about, well, why don't we just start doing it ourselves again? Why don't we just bring our textile production back? It's not as easy as all of that. The equipment itself is very large. It's very like an industrial factory when you're trying to make textiles. So we're going to go ahead and watch a couple videos. The first is on decorrugating. So I want to show you what is being done by some smaller operations in terms of mid-sized mills that you can actually start to buy some of these equipments to process your fiber. And so this is actually a piece of equipment that you can purchase. And I believe it doesn't have sound, so I'll just talk over it.
With
Okay.
documented testing at a capacity over 1.75 tons per hour. The modular system provides flexibility for custom processing
Okay, well, it
facility
sort of has
design,
sound.
additional capacity, and
Yeah, you
future
can just turn
upgrades.
it on down.
It produces
I'll go ahead and tell you what's going on. All right, so what's happening is they put the fiber, they feed it into the front, and what it's going to start doing is it's going to line up those hemp stalks and then send it through a conveyor belt. Those two bins there on the end of the conveyor belt, one is going to catch hurd chunks and one is going to catch more fiber chunks. And you just keep feeding it in there. So you can see the little live feed. This is what it looks like going in there. It's going to start busting it up essentially because you got to get the woody middle part out. All right. Then they're going to kind of shake out the woody part. They don't want that. This allows the fiber to go on top. You can still sell that woody hurd for bedding and other things. So they still want to keep it. They want to sell it, but they're really looking to get the fiber separated out. So you see some of those little circles like bouncing on there. That's the hurd. And then you've got the fibers going in there. The nice thing about this type of equipment is it's a pretty small footprint. So they're looking for, you know, people that might want to have their own operation where they're starting to process some of their fiber themselves. You can actually set one of these up, and they've actually set it up where it's very small footprint for that kind of operation. There is a company in Montana, Hemp, and they actually are running a few of these, and they're making their own textiles, which is pretty cool. So they're collecting that hurd, which they can then sell, which is also very great. And they, again, as you can see there, they have 3 size outputs. Each of those you can sell as different agricultural products. Then they're going to take, and they can actually further sort this if you would like to. You don't have to. They can collect the dust and use that for like concrete type applications. So there's a lot of use of the fiber in general. Not much is going to go to waste. There's the fiber coming out. So that's getting ready to go into the next stage of like degumming and carding and actually spinning. So as you can see, this is a pretty big piece of equipment for just one step. All right. And so that's essentially what the piece of equipment is. It has some little like other parts of the video that we don't really need to watch. They're like why you should buy this. It's a great piece of equipment, but just in order for you to see what's happening, I think is really a critical piece. All right. So we'll go on to our next video. And our next video is going to just show some different states of the fiber. If possible, it would be great to have this with the sound. Sorry to be difficult.
All right, so here we have
Whoops.
the complete raw hemp fiber. This is fiber. It's been corrugated, but it's still kind of raw, just off of the stalk. What they do is there is a degumming process that they want to do where they are removing the lignin and separating the fibers from themselves. So after it's boiled in sodium hydroxide, the fiber goes from this to this right here. This is a degummed hemp fiber. But still, this is a blend of both long and short fibers, and they have to start combing it. And they comb it, and when they're finished, you get something right here, which is hemp sliver. And this is all of the hemp going in the same direction. And here, the one next to it, similar process where they did not do the degumming, but they did do the combing. So this is more of a raw look, 100% hemp sliver. This is a step right before spinning.
Okay, so just briefly, because I know the sound wasn't great. That first step was looking at the fiber as it just got taken off of the hurd and how it kind of comes out. It looks almost sort of like chopped up straw. And then they take it through the process where they can start to comb it and get it into a spinnable situation where all the fibers are aligned. You need them aligned to get them into spinning. The one that was darker brown, that was not degummed, and the white was degummed. And that's the difference. I do actually have a little sample card that you can take a look at and see what's going on. Hemp Traders is one of the locations for hemp fiber that was used. So this leads us to our next big question. Is hemp more sustainable? There is sort of some lingo going around that hemp is super duper sustainable. It's the greatest fiber that's ever known. You know, a little bit of both. It does have some great qualities. It has low consumption of pesticides. It is somewhat weed suppressing, needs less water than, say, cotton. And you can do products from all parts of the plant. So, you know, you're going to use that woody car for something. You can use the leaves for something. You can use the seeds. So you are using the majority of the plant. In general, though, nothing is truly a silver bullet when it comes to sustainability. So I think it's always important to kind of take these recommendations with certain grain of salt. It is a great fiber. It has a lot going for it, but it's not the be all end all for fibers. I was in a meeting a few weeks ago with some of our AgCenter counterparts, and they were talking about growing hemp here, and it is not growing well down here. The southern blight is taking the hemp out. So probably not going to be a really great industry for Louisiana until we get that under control. All right, so hemp and the apparel industry. There are a number of companies that are very interested in using hemp fibers and promoting hemp within their design lines. One of them is Eileen Fisher. I don't know if you all are familiar with this brand, but it's a very sustainable brand. They focus on very classic women's clothing. And one of their major things is they are into circular design. So if they're going to design a product, it is from what we say cradle to grave. So they are worried about how they're going to get the fiber, how they're going to get it to the consumer, and then what is that consumer going to do with the product at the end of the life cycle? Are they going to bring it back to them, which is what they would prefer? They actually have a system where they will sell garments secondhand. And then if the garment is too damaged, they will actually send it for new life, either to be chipped up in a textile shredder and then reconstituted or put into like an installation type situation. So that is one example of a sustainable company using hemp. Another interesting one here is Patagonia. So Patagonia has long been known for being super sustainable. They're out of Oregon. They're, into all of that kind of stuff. They have been promoting hemp as part of their workwear line, which you can kind of think of it as elevated Carhartt. A little bit more expensive, but not horrific. And they're using it because hemp is actually a very strong fiber. So it's tougher than cotton just because of that long, vast length of the stripe of the fibers. So it actually has a little bit more strength, and that's what Patagonia has been using it for. Interestingly, they want the fiber so badly, they're actually working with farmers to provide them loans to get them growing hemp. There is sort of a lag right now in the financial support, insurance for farmers to grow hemp because it's a newish crop. People aren't as sure of what they should do with it. So Patagonia as an end consumer is actually stepping in and saying, look, farmer, I will give you a loan to grow some hemp for me, and we're going to put it into our workwear line. So pretty interesting. All right. So this leads us to sustainable apparel design. And we're going to talk about just the number of ways that apparel design is starting to think about sustainability, how we implement it into our products, and what we as consumers could be thinking about. All right, so we're going to touch on these different ways that you can approach sustainability. There are pre-consumer methods of thinking about sustainability. They relate to fiber, pattern, as well as production location. And then post-consumer, we can think about upcycling and recycling. This does not cover sustainability within the apparel industry as a whole. There are even more things as consumers. You can think about laundering less often. You can think about wearing things longer, repairing. So there's even more than this, but this will at least give us a start to what's happening. So sustainable fiber, we are starting to see more and more sustainable fibers on the market. We're starting to see recycled fibers. Target did a whole line of recycled polyester sweaters last year. So I was quite excited to see, recycled fiber, and they called it out on their tags. We see organic fibers. A lot of us are familiar with organic cotton. It has to be certified by the government, uses certain methods of production, no pesticides, that sort of thing. And then we also just have natural fibers. You can think about wearing fibers that aren't made from petrochemicals. So that's like your cottons, your jutes, your linens, as well as your hemps. Pattern making. You can be more sustainable through your pattern making. So when we cut out a traditional pattern to make apparel, there is a lot of waste. The apparel industry typically throws 10 to 15% of the fabric that they're cutting garments from on the cutting room floor, just waste. So that's a major issue. Designers have started to adopt principles of what we call zero waste pattern making. So this is one of my colleagues, and this colorful infographic, as well as the drawing of the jacket, This comes from an article we published in the Journal of Sustainability. But what you do with zero waste is you slightly alter your pattern making, takes a little more front end thought, but you fit everything perfectly together so that no waste is generated. So absolutely nothing goes on the cutting room floor, whereas the little dress here, we can see how much is not getting cut and is going to be wasted. This is a fairly like obvious one, but thinking about production, like where are we actually going to produce something? Every time we produce overseas, which has become the norm for the apparel industry, we have to put it on a cargo ship and bring it back here. You know, when everything was getting bogged down in the Suez Canal a few years ago, apparel was freaking out because, you know, we couldn't get any new product over here. So that did start to, you know, we've been thinking about reshoring, which is the idea of bringing production back to the US. We're like, okay, well, we lost a lot of our machinery. What are we going to do? We lost a lot of that inherent knowledge of how to fix the machinery. So it's something that we are starting to see conversations about. There is a really wonderful denim mill I was able to visit last year in Vidalia, and they are actually making denim in Vidalia. So it's very cool, very interesting. It's super high end. They've purchased all these old looms from like World War II, and they have them all and they're running them. But they had to find like the one guy that could still fix them because that knowledge was not really readily available anymore. So we're starting to see it, but there are definitely challenges. Okay, so post-consumer, we have a lot of options. We can do things like upcycling. We have companies such as the Portland Garment Factory that are focusing on upcycling, which is taking old garments that are past their life cycle. They may be stained, they may have holes, whatever, cutting them into pieces and then reconstituting them into new garments. So instead of this going in the landfill, we make it into a new garment. Very high end, very, very interesting. So there are a number of companies that are starting to really adapt to this idea. And then if you have your garment that's just not savable, you can think about recycling. Madewell, wonderful company. You can bring your old jeans back. They recycle those into insulation for houses. So there are a number of companies that are starting to try to take the garments back that you no longer want or that are just completely unfixable, and they're going to do something with it. So companies are starting to build some of these thoughts into their ethos. Which leads us to Hemp Impressions. So this exhibit, and I'm going to briefly touch on this. We could go to the next slide. I was invited to submit a proposal to do a hemp project. And I thought to myself, okay, hemp, rope. I don't really think about hemp actually, and I'm not sure if I've ever really touched hemp. That's the problem. I've been in apparel design for way too long. So I figured if I was having this issue, probably a lot of my other peers were having this problem. So I thought, you know what? We just need to get exposed to hemp. We need to know what it is. We need to know why it's cool. Let's do an exhibit challenge. So I put out a call through the International Textile and Apparel Association. It's where a lot of the university professors in my field belong. And I thought, I'll take a ground up approach. If I can get some students, I can get some professors, everybody gets excited, we start using hemp, we tell other people, we teach it in our classes. Suddenly, hemp doesn't go from like, I'm not even sure what it is, to being a much more at the forefront of our thoughts. We had, we put out that call in spring of 24. We got 31 entries submitted, and we ended up taking 70% of those. So the pieces you see today, there's 22 of them. And they all have a number of different things that are worked into them in terms of sustainability, but they're all at least 50% hemp fiber. This piece here by Dawn from Auburn University is actually transformable. So instead of being a single look, you can actually have two looks. You can take the bottom part of the coat off, scrunch up the top. Suddenly the garment has more usefulness. It's 2 in 1. This piece is by my colleague, Sabes Shia. And what she was looking at is how to use computerized knitting with hemp fibers to create a new sort of textile. She used an elastic yarn at the back to create this really stretchy and interesting fiber. I definitely would love for you to look at that. Okay. This is another really interesting piece where the designer, Andrea Eklund, who's from Central Washington, she wanted to look at just comfort. Let's emphasize the comfort and wearability of hemp. It's something that you could wear every day. It's very like beautiful, but it's also something that consumers would absolutely adopt. This is another interesting piece. Dr. Hobbs Murphy from Colorado State, she used a rug tufting gun to create this texture. So she was very interested in looking at how she could create texture with the hemp fibers and really go for a high fashion look. Fruit Loops, this was a collaboration by Dr. Michelson from Auburn, as well as her student Umi Bashira. And they actually wanted to create a top that was somewhat transformable to a degree. It's made of little rings. You snap them together. And so you could potentially go in there and alter it somewhat. And then they did hand dyeing to create the pants that match with it. And it has a knit side panel to give a little more stretch and wearability. Again, more than 50% hemp. All right. This is my good friend Colleen from West Virginia, and she does bridal. She said, you know what, I'm going bridal. I'm going to make a hemp bridal gown. So she figured out, what are the trends in sustainability for brides? It is a growing thing that people are excited about. And she also wanted to focus on this idea of transformable. So she created this gown that has the train, very traditional for your ceremony, but you can loop it up and get a whole second look as opposed to buying that second reception gown. So again, cutting down on that whole idea of like, you don't really need 2 wedding gowns. All right. Hemp Harmony. These are by Dr. Morris and Dr. Alpha Tooney. I always say her wrong. Sorry, Lita. All right. And they were focused on this idea of adaptive design. They're very interested in creating design that all users can use. So like people that might have some physical disabilities, they can still wear this. It has magnetic closures, very easy to use. And it's a laser cut textile. So they actually used a laser cutter to create the design on it. And then they did some AI generation to come up with design concepts for it. So very interesting, pretty exciting. Little piece over here. This is my piece actually. And I looked at ways that I could use some upcycling. So I upcycled some lace and flower samples. So the little rosettes they were samples that were sent to our department. They're about this big. Like, what can you do with this? So I made them into flowers. And then I do a lot of basketry. So it has a basket top. And again, it's a hemp silk blend. This design I'm very excited about. These are 3 students from Oregon State, and they actually worked on how to create a gardening look, so a very functional look for somebody who's a gardening enthusiast. And they used hand dyeing techniques. So the top was done with marigolds and the skirt was done with logwood to create that look. This is another undergraduate design, and she used quilting techniques where she pieced all these little small denim triangles of hemp together. And she wanted to use like a 1970s inspiration to create this little suit here, very functional. Melanie Kerkos from UNCG, and she looked at using zero waste pattern design, which we discussed earlier. So she created this coat, and the idea is it's something very wearable, and again, no waste created whatsoever with this. She then hand painted the leaves on there and then embroidered the marigolds. Dr. Simpson from Western Michigan, she utilized strip quilting. So, and I really do, please take a look at it. Each of these little blue and white pieces are a little tiny quilted piece. It's not a print whatsoever. She quilted these all together or pieced them all together. And then she actually folded over the blue to create that pleated skirt. So you have the navy situated at the waist. This is another really great piece. This is from Dr. Bissonnet from University of Alberta. She looked at 90s minimalism. So this idea of kind of like 90s chic, and she used zero waste thinking to create her pattern. It's 4 pieces. It has a top, a pant, a jacket, and a little belt. But again, very, very little waste. Dr. Elliott is actually another one of our faculty members at LSU. She wanted to do a 70s retro look. This was actually one of her first garments, so she's very proud of herself. She's more on the merchandising side of the universe, so we got her excited and she did it. So we're very proud. But she's an embroiderer and she's an amazing embroiderer. She used Shishiko mirror embroidery, which originated in Persia, and it's also very big in India, to create her piece. This is another student from Oregon State, and he, Jackson Flint, he looked at creative pattern making and trying to do a very consumer-driven design. So he actually has very circular seams in there that have been top stitched to make this jean. But again, using that strength of hemp to create a denim pant that is very wearable, but still fashion forward. Our Orchid Keepers bag. This is another really cool one from Dr. Starkey, University of Nebraska. She dyed the fabrics with hibiscus, geraniums, red cabbage, and curry powder. And then she actually dried real orchids and put them on vellum, and they're hanging off that bag. So very worth a look. The Hempavaya this is by Yessi Chavez. She's an independent designer. She hand painted her garment, and then she actually put the sleeves of a motorcycle jacket into it to create something was still modest and yet very fashion forward. And we're rounding it out, guys. We're almost done, I promise. Denim Diamonds. This is by our own Martha. She's right here sitting in our audience. This is the designer. She looked at playing with the popular theme for bachelorette parties, which is denim and diamonds, but how to create that using hemp. And she hand beaded the little bows on the shoulders. It's very, very cute. So definitely worth a look. And I'm sure she'd tell you about it. Another one of our accessories came from Dr. Thompson out of University of Alabama. She created knitted eye cords out of hemp fibers and then made these little rosettes to create something that's very abstract and interesting. But again, utilizing that hemp fiber to create an accessory. Daria's Legacy. This is a very interesting piece. I believe it's over there. Yes, there it is. So the designer, he worked on using coffee grounds and spices as dye stuffs for this, and it uses some camel leather. And so he's from Saudi Arabia, so that's where the styling comes. And this is the piece that they ended up with. Lauren was a graduate student on our program. She just graduated and moved on to Auburn to pursue her PhD. She looked at using pin tucks, and she just used 2 different colors of green to create the rows of stitching. And that's how she created her textile and then cut it to create this garment. She was looking for something very like Southern friendly, very related to, you know, our heat and everything, but also drawing on our traditional looks down here. And then last but not least, we have the green jacket from Susan Avila, and that's the University of California, Davis. And she actually she dyed the textile, and then she created fringe, just rows of fringe, and layered them on to create this jacket. And it's really exciting to see how she used pin tucks and then layers of fringe, and then she really clumped it up to make that collar. She also did an end of life consideration where everything in this jacket will break down in the landfill eventually. So there's nothing synthetic. It's a very cradle to grave approach. All right, we are to the end of our discussion for the day. So I can take any questions if you have any.
Yes, that was a wonderful presentation. I'll start off with the questions. So actually one of my personal favorite pieces was yours, the Flora Louisiane. Have you had an occasion to wear it yet, or do you plan to?
So as a designer, I have a number of pieces I make, and I don't really do much with them after I'm done with them. They go in plastic tubs in my office.
Oh,
So no, I haven't worn it. I don't think it would. I don't know if it would sit well. Clara says she'll wear it for me.
oh, it's
She's modeled for
beautiful.
me before. Yeah,
And-
it's Tuesday.
And other questions? Oh, we got one right here.
Does it breathe as well as cotton?
It's a nice weaving fabric as well as knitting because it is so strong. It's actually a little better than cotton because it has that long fiber length.
I have more questions.
Yeah, go for it.
when you go by to a fabric store, I guess the only one we have is Joann's. Do they have any of this yet?
Yeah, that's a good question. No, Joann's is not carrying hemp yet, but you can get it from Mood Fabrics, and a number of our denims came from Mood. And then actually the hemp silk blend that a lot of us used came from a company called Dharma. So Dharma Fabrics, yeah. They sell dyes as well.
What's the problem with Louisiana? Is it the soil? Is it the rain? Is it the amount of?
So Southern
Soil.
blight, more than anything, it's apparently a disease that plants get down here because you can't really use pesticide for it. At least that's what I was told.
Can you repeat that?
It's called Southern blight. It's a disease the plant gets.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not doing well. They'll figure it out. They're real smart.
Do we have any recycling places for fabric? I noticed that in Maryland. I was just in Maryland and they have a recycling place for all the fabrics.
Yeah, there are a lot more recycling efforts in terms of textiles, which is great.
Do we have it here?
No, we're a little behind on recycling, but we may get there eventually.
Okay.
So, I noticed a lot of the different designs used hemp that was blended with other fibers. So what are some fibers that you think would blend best with hemp?
So hemp is very interesting in terms of blendability. It blends nicely with a lot of things. We have the hemp silk. I'm actually wearing hemp cotton. And I've seen hemp linen, and you don't usually, I bought a dress that was hemp wool as well. So it's blended nicely with all those. I haven't really seen it blended with synthetics much, but I think that's because it still has this very like natural kind of crunchy thing going on. So people don't really want a hemp polyester.
Yeah, I feel like it'd kind of cancel each other out.
Yeah, I like defeats the purpose.
That's neat. I'm excited to see all the different blends in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm curious about, you mentioned right at the end about it breaking down in landfill, specifically about the fringe jacket. How does it break down? Do you have an idea of how it breaks down versus cotton and definitely synthetics?
You know, I haven't seen anything in terms of how fast it breaks down, like compared to cotton. That would be a very interesting study. I do know there are some researchers with cotton ink. I was there a few years back, and they've been doing work on like how fast cotton can break down. But one of the tricks with breaking garments down and decomposability is a lot of times we still sew our garments with synthetic thread because synthetic thread is tough, or we put rivets in them and that won't break down. So we still have problems. But when you think about like a circular design process, and you think about that end of life, you don't include synthetic fibers for your thread or any sort of like metals or anything like that that won't break down.
Have y'all done any work with protective coverings with hemp? Like, so I have to wear FRC at work. I was wondering if y'all have tried any kind of coating on hemp fabrics to see if they, because you said Patagonia work clothing and stuff. I mean, that's a big industry here with FRC. I'm wondering if y'all have done any research in that?
We haven't specifically at LSU, but I definitely think it is an interesting area, especially with the success of the Patagonia line and with how strong the hemp is. We're going to start seeing more and more of it in that workwear arena because it's outperforming. It would be easy to apply coatings of protective natures, much like you do with a cotton. But you really need like a textile scientist to do that. And ours sadly retired a few years ago.
Are there any countries outside of the U.S. that have really adopted hemp? Because I saw on one of the slides, it seemed like production in the U.S. was kind of halted when the various laws were passed. So I was just curious if any places outside of the U.S. kind of continued with their growth and cultivation of hemp.
Yeah. Hemp production definitely was continuing in other countries. It does have a bigger following in Europe. So yes.
Okay, the high TSH cannabis that they currently have in Louisiana, are they using the fiber to make?
No, usually that's two separate varieties.
So
like-
you can't use the high TSH one for fiber.
I
fiber.
believe there's regulations against doing that at this point in time. I'm
Really?
not sure if you like theoretically could, but we don't.
Yeah, I can see people burning their
Yeah,
clothing.
exactly. So maybe theoretically you could.
Well, are there any other questions? No? Well, that was a wonderful talk. And yes, and if y'all didn't get a chance to take a look at the garments, please make sure you take a look at all the beautiful garments. Also, we will have them on display tomorrow as well. So if you know of anyone who would like to come in and see them, we'll be open tomorrow from 9 to 3. And thank you so much, Dr. Casey. That was a truly amazing and enjoyable talk.
Well, thank you all very much for coming. And if anyone wants to look at the fiber, I've got the little card here. Thanks.
And then we also have some program evaluations that we always do after all of our programs. So if anyone has a moment, if y'all wouldn't mind filling these out, and this always just kind of let us know things that you like, things that you want to see more of. And also please be sure to follow us on our Facebook page for Louisiana's Old State Capitol, because we have a lot of events coming up and always love to see people here.